We are in downtown Charleston, and I'm visiting with Marty Whaley Adams Cornwell in her garden, which once belonged to your mother, because we are in Mrs. Whaley's garden. Tell me how your mother came to have this garden.
She was a very smart lady. She took to the bed one time and didn't get out of it for a while, and my father said, "Emily, what can I do to get you out of this bed?" And really the reason was she was missing the countryside where her mother raised horses. There were cows, chickens, and she was placed here in the middle of an urban area and not too happy about it, had a lot of adjusting to do. So anyway, my father said, "What can I do to get you out of this bed?" And she said, "You can get Loutrel Briggs to come design a garden for me."
And for people who don't know, who is Loutrel Briggs, or who was Loutrel Briggs?
He, to me, is one of the more talented landscape architects that has been around for centuries. He's up there with the Olmsted brothers. And he moved from New York and came down here, I'd say in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and has touched many little back patches of land in back of gardens in Charleston.
Little is the operative word, because this is a small space, and yet you said the handmark, the way you recognize his gardens, is how diverse, how much he can do with a small space. Let's talk about how we enter this garden and the different rooms we go through. As we stand on the street, we actually begin our experience, and you've got a little bit of reveal and conceal with some beautiful pittosporum.
Well, immediately you're drawn in. There's a mystery, and who doesn't love a mystery? Who doesn't want to wander on down and find out whatever that is that's at the end or through the gate or that is beckoning you on? And
who doesn't want to open a gate?
Exactly. And fortunately, you can open this gate sometimes. So what he was so talented about was the different moods, the different scale, the different opening and closing, the proportions, and he just had a natural knack in knowing when to do these things and when not to.
Even as we walk in that first very small space, your mother talks about vignettes, where there are things that catch your eye with variations in texture. And in there, I think it's kind of natural, but she didn't overly care for things. She let nature have its hand.
Exactly.
But we move past that, and as we come around, we get a glimpse of what is something that you have added, I think, and that is a more vertical element. The first thing that really caught my eye were these sculpted podocarps.
I think they're sensational. I'm thrilled we put them in. It took a lot of nerve. We had to take out an old camellia that was kind of in the way and preventing anything good happening in these two beds. We also had a very mature maple tree that we had to get rid of. It was giving too much shade. But this all happened because I had through our Horticultural Society the fun of meeting Prince Charles's head gardener from Highgrove.
Wow.
Right. That was real. He's also attractive.
Which is always fun.
Right.
You did inherit your mother's interest in the opposite sex.
Exactly.
But you said he gave you three options and that this was the least expensive.
This was the least expensive, and to me the most successful. I mean, I just knew this is the way I wanted to go. He and I communicated by email and photography through email all one summer, and then he came in September and worked for 2 days. And it was my birthday and Christmas present from my very smart husband.
How about that? Just like your father gave
Exactly.
your mother her interest. But there is a lot of geometry here, and that again relates to Mr. Briggs, because circles and circles in plant material and circles in the design of the earth and even the pool were features of his. And so let's talk a little about the circles that we have in this garden.
Well, circles, as we know, the circle of life. We hear this mantras, everything. To me, a circle is much more interesting, or a curved line, than a straight line with a right angle curve. It's abrupt, it stops your eye, and the curves here are softened again also with ferns and every kind of beautiful thing, like the heliotrope that we'll see in a minute, and the boxwoods. So the curves, they're sexy. Let's face it.
If we have them, they would be. And I love, as we start, and right now we're sitting in what is the living room, and it's a wonderful space for entertaining, which your mother loved to do casually. She didn't put on the dog too much, did she?
She did it in a way that made everyone feel they didn't have to immediately return the invitation with, going up in scale and one outdoing the other. She wanted to be accessible to everybody, to the point she used paper plates out here.
I love that.
She wanted to be able to have a party and be ready in 5 minutes if she decided that 5 minutes before. And that's something I learned from both my grandmother and my mother. Always have a cocktail party, a dinner party, a breakfast, a luncheon in your freezer, so that in the spur of the moment, if you want to entertain someone or have them in, you can be hospitable.
To use that phrase in her book, yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
And then we moved from here into, she said grass was important, and we don't think of that. We all poo-poo grass, I do. But she said it's very important to have order and calmness, and it rests your eyes. So she did have that. And you said sometimes would use some conch shells we saw to keep people from tromping on it. Tell me how she would incorporate those.
And I still do. I bring a lot of shells. To me, they're God's sculptures. And they're amazing things to look at a nautilus. If you cut them in half, what's been going on inside there, and the miracle of that, to me, is a more beautiful thing I could put out there than the most talented sculptor in the world. But she used them as ornaments. She buried them so that the top would prevent people from stepping in certain parts of the grass. We may have to do that. This is our third lawn in the last 6 years. And by God, we're not putting in another one. So we are going to probably have to bury some conchs.
One of the things that, again, Loutrel Briggs had were focal points. And the pond, the round circular pond, it's actually hard to wash your feet off in. You've managed to make it seem deep. And also at that pond, you have a sculpture that has a wonderful history. Tell us about that little special area there.
That pond, I think, has probably been copied all over the world. I have a friend who said that her husband gave her $25,000 to copy Ms. Whaley's garden up in Connecticut. So the pond is popular, it is loved, and it's an accident, really, in a way, because Loutrel Briggs had planned for it to be about a foot deep. Mm-hmm. And he showed up one day during construction, and Mama had it 2 inches deep. And he wound up giving her a lot of praise for that. I think he was a little unnerved at first that she'd meddled with his design, but she said, I don't want my children to drown. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But the other wonderful thing about it being shallow is that birds land on water that they can't see the bottom of. Mm-hmm. So we've got a wonderful menagerie of different kind of birds out here, and animals.
And the lovely sculpture.
No, that's a treasure. That belonged to my Uncle Nick and Emily Roosevelt in their Gypsy plantation garden. It was at the end of a long, long alley that she had planned and designed. And at one point it was painted green. The gardener's wife, when she returned from being away for the summer, said, Miss Emily, I've got something wonderful to show you. I've painted all the statuary green. So there are a few flakes underneath here and there, and I think that's a wonderful story. And she said, how wonderful. I love that you were so helpful.
It's so kind of her to be nice about having her family heirloom painted.
Right, and it's marble,
Yes.
So you don't mess with marble.
No, and that is the focal point, but the garden doesn't stop there. It continues, and it continues in a slightly less formal way, and it narrows, again, perhaps maybe like references to a woman's body with curves and a narrow waist, which I certainly wish I had. It narrows, but then opens into a place that you say is a little shadier, a place for just more casual seating.
Right. You feel that it's less meddled with by man's hand, and which is not bad at all. This is so beautiful right here, but it's more natural, shade-loving plants, even some wild things that she would bring from Berkeley County to solve the problem of homesickness. She put a lot of things back there from Berkeley County, including soil.
And including rocks, of which there are not many on the peninsula, but you said she just loved rocks. And so beyond that, we've got the place where she just put everything she wanted to have memories and connections with.
Funny little statues of animals. There are little ducks back there, a fox, a cat that's about to pounce. a dog's head that guards our pet cemetery that's hanging on the wall. And one of the rocks was a meteor that fell on her mother's plantation, Belvedere. And I've never found out which one was the meteor, but I'd sure love to know.
We'll have to get a specialist to do that. She talked about borrowed features, and you were very fortunate to have two beautiful trees that give you shade, but they're not taking up space in your yard.
It's true. And give us shade, sometimes too much. We've thinned this one out particularly. But it's the borrowed landscaping she talked about in her book. If you've got a steeple somewhere, or a beautiful brick wall.
And you do have
rooftops.
a beautiful brick wall.
And we have that beautiful brick wall that is probably from the 1700s. It gives you a feeling of age and mystery again.
But I'm fascinated because that wall was redone and has some very, very vertical small windows. And the new plant that you've introduced that you think your mother would love so much, the bear's bridges, the agapanthus, that you have, that bloom is just a reflection
Isn't that
of
amazing?
that. So you've got the verticality of the podocarpus that you introduced, the bloom on the agapanthus, and then those wonderful slits, those kind of modern, but I think appropriately blended in windows in the borrowed landscape of the wall. In that wonderful little backspace where she probably kept a pair of tennis shoes hidden under a bench too. That again is borrowed landscape, a beautiful wall, and you and I were talking about new plants that you've enjoyed. She liked Fatsia, so I think she would have loved agapanthus, which you've introduced. And the how do we now say ligularia? Farfugium.
Farfugium.
Yeah. Again, round.
Beautiful round
shape.
shape.
Yeah. But the bloom on the agapanthus just reflects that vertical slit, that modern window that fits in that wall.
Wonderful serendipity. I had no idea that we would have that beautiful combination of lines and shapes.
And as I sit here and it's a little bit hot, I am soothed by the sound of water. And you, of course, are an artist in your own right, and I think that the marvelous head in that fountain is one perhaps that you take responsibility for.
I sure do. My only wall fountain that I have, or fountainhead that I've ever made, and I'm tempted to make some more just for the fun of it. But it was a class I took at our local museum called Making Pots for the Garden, and I made my pot in 15 minutes and said, now what? So I made this fountain, and it's been running now for 14 years.
When we talk about containers, your mother said that clay ones were fine with her, that she didn't have a whole lot of money. But there's a variety of ones here, and you just have them propped up on different things to have some different elevations. And I think that probably some of that, because these are heavy, are due to the fact that you now have a young and vibrant gardener who helps you.
I certainly am a lucky, blessed soul to have Paul Saylor show up when he did. He read my mother's book during high school. I'd say at the age of 13 he was introduced to it, and this is up in North Carolina, where he read the book during lunch at high school and decided he wanted to be a gardener.
So it sounds like he deserves some of the credit for the spontaneity that we see in little places here and there in this garden.
He's thought about this garden for maybe over a decade.
Everyone wants to see Mrs. Whaley's garden, and sometimes your mother was so generous, and now there are opportunities to see it. And if people want to know more about this garden and how they can occasionally find the opportunity to visit it, what's the best way to find out about it?
Well, we are now on Facebook.
Wow.
And we publish photographs I did this morning from up on the balcony.
Mrs. Whaley's garden?
That's right.
All right.
And we have a website, mrswhaleysgarden.com.
Well, thank you for finding a way to be refreshed in your mother's garden, for giving it a fresh face, for bringing Paul into it, and for letting visitors to Charleston see and have a feeling of the hospitality that she always extended to visitors. You've done a wonderful job. She'd be proud of you.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you.